The plate was still warm in my hands when it happened. Roasted chicken, golden skin, crisped just how Gavin liked it, with rosemary, garlic and salt, rubbed in deep. I'd made the side dishes that morning before my back started acting up. He was late to the table as usual, phone in one hand, that clipped tone in his voice like I was interrupting something important. I offered the plate. He didn't take it. Instead, he stepped forward, eyes sharp, jaw locked. And then, like a switch flipped, he snarled loud enough to rattle the kitchen windows. "You disgusting old woman." The words hit before the spit did. Hot, wet, and sudden right on my cheek. It dripped down beside my mouth. I didn't flinch. I didn't drop the plate. I just stood there between the fridge and the stove like my body had turned to stone. Raya let out a soft laugh behind him. Not even a full one. Just the sound people make when they see something pitiful. And my grandson, little Kai, stood by the doorway holding a plastic spoon frozen in place. His eyes darted between me and his father, like he couldn't understand who we all were anymore. I wiped my cheek with the back of my hand. Not roughly. Not slowly either. Just clean. Like I was clearing a counter. I didn't look Gavin in the eye. "Dinner's ready?" I said, my voice steady. Not small, not loud. He didn't sit. He muttered something under his breath and walked out, still texting. Raya followed. She didn't look at me. Not even once. Kai stayed. He set his spoon down on the table, then slowly walked over and wrapped his arms around my waist. I didn't move. I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I stared at the wall clock, the one Thomas had hung years ago. Its second hand ticked soft, and even like nothing had just happened at all. I used to walk to work at 3 a.m. Thick socks, stiff knees, and a thermos full of black coffee. The sorting machines were loud, the floors cold, but I never missed a shift, not once. The post office became my second home after Thomas died. A car crash on I-76. One moment, I was ironing his shirt for work. The next, I was signing for his personal effects. Gavin was only 9. He didn't cry much, just got real quiet. I remember thinking he's already trying to be the man of the house. And so I tried to be both parents, strong, patient, steady. I sold my wedding ring that winter, had it melted down at a pawn shop in South Philly. Bought Gavin a used Honda Civic with the cash. Red paint faded, but the engine worked just fine. I still have the receipt in a shoebox somewhere. When college came, I didn't want him to carry debt. I clipped coupons, skipped new shoes, said no to vacations, paid it all in cash. Every semester, I handed him a check like it was nothing. And when people asked why I never dated again, I just smiled. I didn't want Gavin growing up thinking he came second to anyone. So when I hear him say, I owe them for staying in his house, I wonder where all of that went. The car, the tuition, the meals, the nights I stayed up through his fevers. Apparently, a house becomes his the moment his name is on the Wi-Fi account. Raya doesn't correct him. She echoes it. Your mother's lucky to live here rent-free. Rent-free, she says? Like the mortgage I paid off 10 years ago never happened. Last week she left a lease application on the counter. No names on it. Just mine highlighted. No note, no conversation. Just a quiet suggestion, pay up or get out. That's when I opened the bottom drawer of my dresser. Pulled out a folder I hadn't touched in 12 years. The paper inside still smelled like ink. It was close to midnight. I was heading to the kitchen for a glass of water when I heard Raya's voice drifting down the hall. She should be grateful we let her stay, she said. Casual, like she was talking about some stray dog. Gavin's gonna refinance the house anyway. It'll be in his name by Christmas. There was laughter on the other end of the call. Raya laughed back. Light, effortless. I didn't move, just stood there in the dark fingers wrapped around the doorframe. The house refinance. I hadn't heard a word about that. I waited until she hung up before moving. My knees protested with every step as I walked to the old roll-top desk in the guest room. My desk. Bottom drawer. Manila folder. Labeled deed. Final copy. Gone. The breath left my chest like I'd been pushed. I rifled through the rest tax records, birth certificates, my will. All still there, but the deed. The document with my name on the title, the one I'd tucked away for safekeeping, missing. I didn't sleep. Just laid there watching shadows crawl across the ceiling until the sun came up. At 9 a.m., I called the county clerk. Gave my parcel number, confirmed my identity. There was a pause. Then the woman on the line said, "Yes, we have a refinance request pending on the property. Signed and notarized 3 days ago." My voice barely worked. "Whose signature? Corletha Maynard," she said. "That's you, correct," I said. "Yes," but inside I was already shaking my head. Because I hadn't signed anything. And I sure as hell didn't authorize Gavin to touch my house. I hung up. Sat very still. Then walked to the linen closet, pulled down the old fireproof lockbox from the top shelf, and set it on the table. The key was still on my necklace. Inside every original document I'd ever protected, including the first version of the deed, untouched. But not useless. Not anymore. 12 years ago, I had a health scare. Nothing fatal, but serious enough to land me in the hospital overnight and force me to think hard about the future. That same week, I called Sheila, my oldest friend and a retired paralegal. She'd always said, "Don't wait until you're dying to protect what's yours." We sat at her kitchen table with mugs of burnt coffee and drafted the trust. Quietly, without fanfare. I transferred the deed into it and appointed myself trustee with one backup executor listed at the bottom, Thera J. Maynard, my niece. Not Gavin. Then I made copies, placed one in a safety deposit box at the bank downtown, and the original went in the lockbox that now sat open in front of me. I looked at the paper. My name in my handwriting. Legal. Binding. Protected. They never asked about it, Gavin and Raya. I doubt they even thought twice about whose name was actually on the documents. I'd paid the mortgage off 10 years ago, kept everything up to date. I just never bragged about it. I figured love would cover what silence never explained. But now, love wasn't enough. I dialed Thera. She answered on the second ring, her voice groggy. "Auntie, I'm cashing in that favor," I said. "It's time." She didn't ask questions, just said she'd drive over that evening. By noon, I was at the bank. The woman at the front desk still remembered me, said I looked well. I signed the retrieval form, opened the box, and pulled out the folder I hadn't touched in over a decade. Everything was intact. Deed, trust agreement, power of attorney, all notarized. When I walked out of that bank, the autumn wind hit my face, sharp and cold. I didn't mind. The house wasn't just mine again. It always had been. Now it was time to remind them. I made coffee that morning, the way Thomas used to strong a little bitter no sugar. I poured 2 mugs and set them on the porch table, hoping the weight of the warm ceramic might ground me. The wind carried the faint scent of damp leaves and old wood. It used to mean fall was coming. Now it just reminded me that things die slowly before they fall apart. I asked Gavin to sit. He came out with that slow, cocky stride he always used when he thought he had the upper hand. He didn't notice the second mug until he sat down. Didn't thank me either. I let the silence stretch. He hated silence. "You know, I said finally, I sold my wedding ring, so you'd have a car for college." He leaned back, arms crossed. "Okay. I worked through 2 winters with bronchitis because we needed the health insurance." He shrugged. "You had a job. That's what people do." I looked at him then. Really looked. His jaw was tighter now, shoulders broader. But the warmth I'd once seen in his eyes was gone, replaced with something flat, resentful. "Do you even remember what I gave up for you?" I asked quietly. He scoffed. "You didn't give up anything, Mom. You just coasted. You lived off sympathy and made sure everyone felt guilty about it. It didn't even sting, not the way it should have. Maybe because I'd already buried the part of me that still needed him to understand. I nodded slowly. Okay, I said. I needed to hear that. He looked surprised. Maybe he thought I'd cry or beg or defend myself. But I didn't. I sipped my coffee and let the taste settle on my tongue. I stood and walked inside, leaving the door open behind me. That night, I called Sheila and Thera. We set the papers in motion. The letter would go out by morning. 30 days to vacate. Quiet. Legal. Final. At 2 p.m. Sharp the doorbell rang. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my crossword, pretending not to be listening for it. Gavin answered. From where I sat, I heard the courier's voice, polite neutral. A zip of the envelope being handed off. Gavin signed without asking questions. He always did that, signed things like they were beneath him. The front door clicked shut. Silence, then footsteps. A pause. The sound of paper tearing. Another pause. 30 minutes passed before the shouting began. First came the cursing. Low, fast, sharp. I could tell he read the entire thing twice. Raya must have walked in mid-rant because I heard her voice next. High-pitched. Panicked. Vacate. What the hell is this? The slam of their bedroom door shook the frame in my hallway. I didn't move. I was already in my room, door locked, blinds closed. I'd put on an old jazz record just before the courier arrived. The saxophone wove through their chaos like it belonged to another world entirely. Then Gavin pounded on my door. Mom, what the hell did you do? I stayed seated. More pounding. Louder. You can't just kick us out. This is my house. His voice cracked on that last word. That's when I stood. I walked to the door, rested my palm against the wood, and said, Calm, even I took back what was never yours. Silence followed. No more banging, no more shouting. Just the low hum of that record and the ticking clock above my dresser. I didn't open the door. Didn't need to. By nightfall, I heard drawers opening. The soft sound of someone crying in the bathroom. I didn't go to them. Instead, I poured myself a cup of coffee, stepped onto the back porch, and looked out at the yard I'd once mowed every weekend. It needed tending again, but now, finally, it was mine to care for. The hardest part wasn't the paperwork or the confrontation. It was choosing which boxes got labeled Gavin and which ones got labeled theirs. Sheila walked me through the vacate notice, every line worded to the letter. Thera dropped it off at their door with a copy pinned to the fridge. It was all formal now, signed, sealed, tracked. But formality doesn't make it easier. I didn't pack in anger. I packed in truth. Raya's blazers, Gavin's shoes still new with tags, electronics chargers, unopened gadgets I didn't know how to use. I folded each item carefully and sealed each box with quiet hands. The garage filled up fast. I taped a sheet to each lid, what room it came from, who it belonged to, and whether it was fragile. I wasn't going to be accused of damage. Not now. Not after everything. But when I stepped into the nursery, I stopped. The rocking chair still sat in the corner, the yellow one Thomas refinished before Gavin was born. It had a little squeak in the left leg, just like it always did. Toys were stacked in the bins I'd organized when they moved in. Diapers folded. A soft blue blanket I'd crocheted, never used. I stood in the doorway, hands at my sides. I didn't pack a thing. The baby hadn't asked for any of this. I turned off the light, gently pulled the door shut, and taped a single note outside. One line. This room stays untouched. Back in my own bedroom, I stripped the sheets, opened the windows, and let the autumn air sweep through. There was peace in the emptiness. Not joy. Not yet. But peace. And by the time the 30 days were down to 3, the only thing left in that garage was a final box labeled Gavin. Misk. Inside a spare house key, a photo of us from when he was 12, and the letter I'd written the day he graduated college, but never gave him. Now I did. I tucked it right on top. He tried. Of course he did. Gavin filed something with the county, claimed the trust was invalid, that I'd been coerced, confused, manipulated. His voice must have trembled when he said it. But the papers held. Every signature, every date, every notarized seal. I didn't have to appear in person. Sheila handled it with precision. Thera kept me updated, her tone steady, not cold. It was done within a week. The day after the ruling, Raya stormed out with 2 suitcases and a scowl. She didn't say goodbye, just hissed as she passed me on the porch. "You've poisoned everything. You're toxic." I didn't answer. I just went back to my coffee. By Friday, I saw Gavin hauling out the crib by himself. No car seat, no stroller. Just sweat and silence. I don't know where the baby was. I didn't ask. A week later, he was back. No knock, just a shadow behind the screen door. I opened it halfway. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "I made a mistake," he said, voice dry. I thought it'd be different. I studied him. He looked older somehow. Not in years, but in heaviness. I didn't feel anger, not anymore, not even sorrow. Just a sharp, clean distance. "You didn't lose your mother, Gavin," I said. "You traded her for convenience." He blinked as if trying to process the words like they were coming from a language he hadn't bothered to learn. I didn't step aside. He didn't ask to come in. We stood there quiet, the porch between us like a line drawn in chalk. He waited. I didn't move. Eventually, he turned, walked back down the steps, slower than he'd arrived. The screen door clicked shut behind me. I didn't cry. Instead, I went into the living room and lit the candle I'd saved for autumn. Let it burn. Let the silence settle. And when the last flame flickered out, I picked up the guest room keys from the table and placed them back in the drawer. I started with the front room. The walls had faded where old picture frames once hung, the beige dull from years of fingerprints and forgotten seasons. I chose a soft almond white and took my time. Each stroke felt like reclaiming something I didn't realize had been taken. I boxed up the old photos from the mantle graduation shots, a wedding portrait I never liked, a blurry family beach trip where I'd been cropped halfway out. I replaced them with new ones. A photo of Thera and me at the botanical garden. A small frame with Thomas holding baby Gavin, both of them smiling. One of Kai, with paint on his hands, sitting at the dining table last fall. My neighbor Miss Elkins passed by as I was wiping down the windows. She waved, and I waved back. No explanation needed. The neighborhood had its own way of listening, without asking. Later that afternoon, Thera showed up with a foil-covered tray and a grin. "Lemon bars," she said. "No rosemary, no tricks." I laughed, really laughed, and invited her in. We ate them in the kitchen, sun stretching across the table, the light soft and forgiving. When she left, I didn't feel the ache of goodbye. Just the warmth of knowing someone had stood beside me when it counted. The living room smelled like citrus and clean wood. I brewed a fresh cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching the light flicker through the blinds. No yelling. No footsteps overhead. No tension creeping under the doors. For the first time in a long while, the silence wasn't heavy. It didn't ask for anything. It just stayed. I didn't wait for an apology. I no longer hoped for one. That part of me had been folded and put away like the letters I used to write but never sent. Now I expected something else. Coffee in the morning, quiet afternoons, the creak of the porch swing and the hum of the fridge. Nothing loud, nothing grand, just space that was mine again. And as I stood to close the curtains, I saw the porch light flicker on. The Saturday market was quieter than usual, early enough that the sun still clung to the tops of tents and the coffee vendors hadn't run out of cream. I walked my usual loop produce first, then the baked goods. It had become a ritual I didn't talk about, but one I looked forward to. I was reaching for a small basket of strawberries when I saw him, Gavin, standing a few feet away near the honey stall. He looked thinner than I remembered, hollow in the cheeks, older in the eyes. His shirt was wrinkled, and his hands were buried deep in his jacket pockets. I don't think he even knew I was there until he turned and froze. We stood still for a beat. Then he walked toward me. I came to say, "I'm sorry," he said. His voice wasn't confident. It was quiet, careful. I studied him not with anger, not even with the kind of ache I'd once carried. Just clarity. He waited. Maybe for a hug. Maybe for permission to step into my life again. I didn't offer either. "You're not a bad man, Gavin," I said, calm. "You're just not the son I raised." That was the line, the one I had held in my chest for months, not shouted, not written, just carried. He blinked, his lips parting like he wanted to protest. Explain, soften the blow. But I didn't wait for the next sentence. I turned, walked toward the stall with the fresh berries. The vendor greeted me with a smile, asked if I wanted my usual half-pound. I nodded, paid in cash. Behind me, I didn't hear Gavin follow. I didn't need to turn around to know he was still standing there. I had said what needed saying, not to hurt him, not to punish him, but to free myself from the version of motherhood that demanded silence, no matter how loud the disrespect became. And as I left the market with my bag in hand, I felt the quiet settle again. This time, it felt like mine.